I keep saying that, you cannot ask fish to fry themselves. So if the commission is an emanation of the government itself, which is finding itself in the spot, then of course the commission will be ineffective. The commission has to be made of people of integrity, respected in the country, and people who are known to be clean. And also the commission has to be put in a position where it's independent and it is able to investigate and prosecute. That way they're fully independent. But if you allow them to refer to some other power which is political, then of course you might take away with the other hand what you've gotten with one hand. So I think the independence and the integrity of the commission is capital.
We have this situation in Africa, as you know, that perhaps Africa is an emerging continent, or we just have emerging economies in Africa. How are Africans able to get out of living in denial that this country, this continent, with its resources, could fall victim, as being very vulnerable to the super mighty continents who are looking into Africa to pick out resources in their own best interest? How do we tackle this?
Well, again, that's a question I did deal with your colleague earlier on. It has to do with the kind of political system we have and those who are leading. And we have to make sure that the leaders that we elect don't come in there with a burden towards those who funded their campaigns. And once you free your leaders from that shackle of the amount of money they spent to get into power, then you are beginning a process whereby they are empowered to be able to deal with the problem fairly and squarely. That also causes them to be able to face these big companies head-on in terms of the kind of advantages they get to exploit their countries and leave. And that has been the biggest problem in terms of the kind of contracts they get, the kind of tax breaks they get. If you look at countries like the Nordic countries, in the oil sector, they are charging upwards from 80% taxes to 90% taxes on these companies. And these same companies come to Africa and they want to pay the lowest amount of tax possible. So I think these are issues that the stronger the government, the more independent it is, the more empowered it is, then it's easier for these countries to be able to face these powerful people who come into countries to try and get everything for nothing.
When you talk about taxes, only recently the Panama Papers were leaked, and we saw that quite a number of African leaders, businessmen, were involved in taking monies and hiding them in tax havens, evading tax, and in some instances just using shell companies to make money from their respective countries. Is there anything, that the African leadership can do to ensure that, things like this, perhaps there's another independent court they can set up and say, we regard this. In some instances, we've heard that corruption is as grievous as a crime against humanity. Perhaps there is some way we can actually elevate this discussion and ensure that people are prosecuted at some international court.
Well, that is true. I am very reluctant when we feel that we should not be able to solve our own problems, because it's giving into the fact that we are incapable or we don't understand that things are wrong. I think we should be able to build a system, maybe at the continental level. When it has an international element, of course, there can be international court, as other matters do. But I think that it is important for us to be able to deal with it. And the problem you raise is by causing the beneficial interest, because all these guys, they use shell companies that are anonymous. Recent studies show that in London, about 40% of the buildings were owned by anonymous shell companies. And I dare say that maybe your country knows a lot about that. Amazing buildings that are there bought and locked up. Canada is just unveiling a huge scandal where the brother of one of the African presidents just bought 12 flats in a building, cash. These are all these red lights that happened. And it is important that our leaders together, and I think that this is what we don't do together, we go to the same countries, keep the money, but decide to fight it differently. We have to go together, work collectively. It is a collective problem. It is systemic. If we don't throw the book at these banks and at this government and tell, well, listen, you're asking for this and that, you're not giving us aid here and there, but we have that, we have this resource that we can get back. And I think a more collective approach might yield fruits. So, on the tax side of it, you ask the question, we have to push for disclosure of beneficial interests in all these countries like we have in the Panama
But when
Papers.
you say we, who do you mean?
I mean the African governments and countries. We have to make sure that every time there's a company that buys a building in London, we should know who the shareholders are. The trustees must disclose who the real shareholders are. Well, I heard your Minister of Finance saying that when we find out, we'll ask them where they pay the tax and where the money came from. And I think that's a good place to start. But the thing is that, you know, in Africa we tend to be in a situation where you expect the fish to fry themselves, okay? Because most of the time, those who have to solve this problem are those who are connected to those who are causing the problem. If we don't realize that, then we still have a long ways to go.
Just quickly before we go, we've already been told to wrap up now. What is this crisis, this Anglophone and Francophone crisis going on in Cameroon?
Well, I think it's a matter of the management of diversity. In Cameroon, it's at a macro level because we have two groups coming from a different colonial past, French and English. Okay, in the case of Cameroon, a bit of Nigeria as well. So this diversity has been mismanaged by a system by malgovernance, really, you know, and that's the bad thing about corruption. It exacerbates other problems, and in Cameroon, that's basically what it is. And so if you mismanage diversity, even in Nigeria, I would say, you wind up in a situation where there's injustice, there's inequity, and some other people complain. And the more you're a minority, the more you feel crushed. And in the case of Cameroon, of the Anglophone minority by 25%, and they've had the defacing of the judiciary system, which is what you have here, and of the education system, which is the English-based. Most of the Cameroonians, a lot of them, were trained here, the law school here, and stuff like that. You know, the legal tradition is very different, and there's been an erosion of this tradition, and it came to a head when there were strikes, and it has caused a lot of aggro, and the government, like any African government, acted in a very heavy-handed manner. Instead of looking for means of conciliating it, it could crush it. As usual, when you're dealing with a minority, there is this notion that you can easily crush it. But that's not been the case because the whole country is mismanaged. So we are in a really serious situation where a lot of Anglophones were arrested, internet was knocked out for Anglophone parts for a long time. I'm Anglophone myself, so it's a passionate, emotional issue for me. And we are close to presidential elections that also fuels also the forces who feel that it might be an inroad for people to try and go against the president who's been there for 34 years.
But the situation is normalized somewhat now?
Not at all, not at all. We are still in a situation where there are close to 100 people who are in jail. My office, we have like 80 clients. I say clients, but we are doing the cases pro bono because they are locked up, moved from one part of the country, the Anglophone part, to the Francophone. They are locked up and they are facing trial in military tribunal for terrorism. And it is a sad moment for our country, and I hope that with the effort that many Cameroonians, Anglophone and Francophone, are trying to bring to prevail on the fact that this is a simple question of human rights and the management of diversity, that God willing we will prevail.
Well, we definitely wish you all the best in the resolution of that crisis. Mr. Akere Mona is Chairman, International Anti-Corruption Conference, and also former Vice President, Transparency International Africa, and member of the high-level panel on illicit financial flows from Africa, a body established by the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa and chaired by former South African President Thabo Mbeki. Well, that's where we'll wrap up this segment of Sunrise Daily.